To forum number 2, titled A New Middle East. Forum Chair Victoria Coates, the VP of the Heritage Foundation and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, along with speakers Dan Feferman, Chairman of Sharaka, Middle East and Jewish World Affairs researcher and lecturer, Asher Fredman, Executive Director of the Misgav Institute for National Security, Robert Greenway, Director of the Allison Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation, Ed Husain, Senior Fellow, the Council on Foreign Relations, Shadi Khalloul, founder of the Israeli Christian Aramaic Association, Bobby Rechnitz, Philanthropist and Chairman, Golda Meir, Commemorative Coin Commission, Chairman of the Abraham Accords Roundtable, Washington, D.C., Harold Rhode, Office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense retired advisor on Middle Eastern and Islamic affairs, fellow of the JCFA, and Emily Schrader, a journalist and expert on Iran. Thank you all so much, and thank you everyone for joining us here.
Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today, and also thanks to JNS for their hospitality and organization of this important event for us today, particularly Richard, of course, and Alex. So looking forward to some excellent programming as we get through this afternoon and then, of course, tomorrow. So I know you're not here to hear from me. As I was pondering this topic, the new Middle East, it occurred to me this is very much not your father's Middle East. There are seismic changes at work throughout the region, and I think we will only see those accelerate going forward under perhaps the greatest change agent of them all, Donald Trump. So the panel was selected today to contemplate different angles of how the region may be reforming itself in coming years. So we'll hear about cultural issues, security issues, economic issues, political issues, and we'll hear from each of our speakers, and if we have any additional time at the end, have a little bit of discussion. So Dan, I will kick it off to you.
Can everyone hear me? Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, and thank you for getting the chance to kick things off. Brilliant being here at the JNS conference. I think it's important time at a critical juncture in the region. I want to kind of frame what's happening in the region in this framework of builders and destroyers. That's, I think, the most maybe functional way that we can galvanize kind of the current time of what's happening here. The Abraham Accords, if we go back 4+ years, were really a monumentous event in the region, not just because they kicked off economic ties or Israel had new ties with 3, almost 4 different countries, but because they broke with the outdated paradigms that were dragging back the region, pan-Arabism, Islamism, and that even though they weren't saying it out loud, most of the Arab states, certainly the functioning ones, had recognized that those were failed ideologies. And so the Abraham Accords brought forth new thinking, fresh thinking, and one that I'd like to formulate for you as the foundation of a builder's access, countries that are looking forward in a pragmatic way. And in order to do that, and in order to also bring about this strategic coalition against Iran, against the radicals, who I'm going to later term the destroyers, essentially, the nihilists of the region, they had to figure out how to sideline or minimize, I would say, or begin the process of untangling the Palestinian conflict and essentially ending the the broader Israeli-Arab conflict. That's what really the Abraham Accords should be seen as. In the same sense, the October 7th attack by Hamas, which might have been maybe a little too light on the trigger from their perspective, was a revolt of the destroyer axis. They sought to stop the coming normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, and when Saudi Arabia signs the deal with Israel, that is the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict in the Middle East, and at least a dozen, if not more, Muslim countries will almost immediately sign some kind of normalization agreement with Israel. They sought to peel back, to undo the progress of the Abraham Accords for the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and the Moroccans to pull their ambassadors out. That didn't happen. And they wanted to drag the region into a nihilistic war in order to achieve their never achievable aims. That's exactly what defines a destroyer axis. They don't have achievable goals. They want a forever war in the region. So as much as we here in Israel want and need to absolutely demolish Hamas and the radical axis in this war, the Arab countries do too. And they won't say it out loud, but they say it very much behind the scenes. Anyone who's been in back-channel talks with these Arab states can probably verify that kind of sentiment. Post-October 7th, we've shown that we're able to not outright defeat Hamas, because I think we need to start thinking of defeat and victory when you're fighting what is essentially now a guerrilla organization, a guerrilla militant terrorist group in different ways, but we've certainly severely diminished their capabilities. The fact that Gazans are in the streets marching is a sign that they are no longer afraid of Hamas, or less afraid of Hamas. Hezbollah was all but demolished and taken apart and sidelined within the new Lebanon. Syria, of course, Assad's Syria, the linchpin of the Iranian axis, fell, and Iran was shown to be a massive paper tiger in the region, and the entire region woke up to it. And so we have a chance now with the Trump administration, with the strong, very clear leadership and strategic messaging, for a reset in the region. I think we in Israel need to start thinking of ourselves as the clear regional power. I think too often we see ourselves as the David, and David eventually won that battle and established a united kingdom. So maybe not Goliath, but David part 2, we need to see ourselves as. We have an economy that is the envy of the region. We have a society that's the envy of the region. And we have a military that is absolutely crucial for regional stability. We need to capitalize on these things. The United States now going into direct talks with Iran. We have to capitalize on U.S. power. I was telling my friends behind when we got on stage here, there should be some kind of strategic benefit to being the world's sole superpower. If the Russians can throw their weight around as they do so effectively in the Iranians, the U.S. is infinitely more strong on the military and the economic level. It needs to utilize its military strength. And here we have a chance within the next 3.5 years for an absolute reset on the region, a strategic reset to get Hezbollah completely out of power in Lebanon and to stand behind the new Lebanese government, to figure out what's happening in Syria. I know the new president, al-Shara, has made outreaches to Israel. I'm not saying we should trust him, far from it, but certainly capitalize on the power vacuum that exists there and not let the Iranians and the Russians go back in. Use that weight to pressure the Iranians into a deal that's favorable for us and for the Americans and for the builders of the region. I think that's absolutely possible. Iran is under an immense amount of economic and political duress, and military pressure is effective in that. And let's use this weight, let's use the moment to figure out a new solution to wind down, or at least put on hold, the Gaza issue so we can move into Abraham Accords 2.0.
Thank you, Dan. Asher, moving on to you. You are indeed with Misgav, but we're also proud that you have recently joined Heritage as a visiting fellow as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Victoria. And indeed, soon after the Abraham Accords were signed, I had the tremendous privilege of joining Rob Greenway at the Abraham Accords Peace Institute, which has now become part of the Heritage Foundation. And we wanted to track what was actually happening with the Abraham Accords, beyond the hype, beyond the headlines, what was actually happening. And we saw a tremendous growth in people-to-people ties. We saw tremendous growth in economic ties, all kinds of cooperation in hydrogen and space and AI and diplomacy. And then October 7th happened. And there were some who thought that the accords would fall apart, ties would be broken. In fact, what we saw is that on the one hand, economic ties continued, diplomatic ties continued. In fact, we looked at the data, we looked at trade year over year, 2024, 2023. So after the war, before the war. Trade between Israel and the UAE is up 10%. With Bahrain, it's up 843%. Thank you to Turkey that's not selling us raw materials anymore. It's up with Morocco 40%, with Egypt 31%. Even with Jordan, our trade 2024 after the war is up 7%. But what sort of disappeared? First of all, the momentum. Under President Trump signed 4 agreements in 4 months. President Biden did not add any countries to the Abraham Accords. And a lot of the people-to-people, the public-facing cooperation died down. So the question is, where do we go from here? So certainly now that President Trump is back in office, we're seeing a renewed interest, renewed movement. There's a lot of talk about how do we expand? Where do we go next? What's the next stage, as Dan was talking about, the Abraham Accords 2.0. So just make a couple of quick remarks as to that. There are, I would say, two schools of thought in terms of expansion, and they're not necessarily contradictory, but they're a question of emphasis. One is to put the focus on Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is obviously sort of the big prize. Normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia would change the region. And another school of thought, and it might just be a question of practically what is more likely and where are all the places on the geopolitical chess set, where do they fall into place? But the other school of thought is let's focus on other countries where before October 7th we've made some progress. And I'll just mention countries that there have been media reports, so I'm not saying anything that hasn't been reported, but with Indonesia or Mauritania or Comoros, Maldives, other countries where various types of agreements or cooperation were being forwarded. Much of it has sort of fallen apart since October 7th, but the underlying logic is still there. So that's one question. The question of what will it take, and this I get quite often, to get normalization with Saudi Arabia over the ground, and specifically what is Saudi Arabia going to demand with regards to the Palestinians, and here I'm sure Victoria and Rob can add quite a lot, but the way I see it is that it's not set in stone, meaning it's a function. Certainly the Saudi leadership, the Saudi people have an authentic sympathy for their Palestinian brothers. They have a very clear-sighted understanding of the Palestinian Authority, of the corrupt and ineffective Palestinian Authority, of the nature of Hamas, of the Muslim Brotherhood. The question of what can Saudi Arabia get, certainly from the United States, from the U.S. administration, and from Israel as well, will affect the type of demands it makes with regards to the Palestinian issue. So in a sense, the more it will get in terms of its core interests from the United States, and to a lesser degree from Israel, that will also affect, I believe, that given what appears to be the U.S. administration and Saudi Arabia's desire to reach some very important new agreements, we will be able to find that middle ground, that meeting point between Israel and Saudi Arabia with regards to the Palestinian issue, something that we can both live with. Now, because of the tension, we've seen public opinion in the region take a major hit. We've seen polls showing that 80-90% of populations, Washington Institute polls, still see in countries like Saudi Arabia, even like the UAE and Bahrain, at least 6 months ago, saw the October 7th attacks as a victory for the Muslims. Part it's because the media in the region hasn't changed quite as much as we would have liked it. It may be that there will be challenges in the bilateral avenue. One way to make very important progress, and progress that is very much in the interest of the United States, of Europe, of India, is to focus on multilateral initiatives. And that could be in the field of trade, in the field of technology, in the field of security. I'll just mention one, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, September 2023, the G7 meets in India, signs an MOU to establish this revolutionary trade corridor stretching from India to the EU. It's an alternative to the Chinese BRI, to the Russia-Iranian INSTC, other trade corridors. The projections are that it will cut transit time by 30%. My calculations actually show that it will cut transit time by about 40 to 50%. And I think that, as you may recall, when Saudi Arabia allowed overflights of El Al to fly over its airspace, they didn't say it's because we want to normalize with Israel. They said we want to be a central transportation and logistics hub in the region, and therefore we have to allow all air carriers to use our airspace. I think also with IMEC, we could see Saudi Arabia, other countries in the region that may have difficulty in the very near term moving forward with normalization, which is obviously all which we'd like to see, but increasing cooperation and coordination with Israel around these multilateral initiatives, again, whether it's trade, technology, defense. And I think there's a lot of promise, and of course we now at Heritage are going to continue monitoring and advancing these initiatives that we all hope will lead to the expansion of the Abraham Accords in the near future.
Thank you, Asher. And just a gentle reminder to all our panelists that we do have a max of about 5 minutes for everyone. I know that's going to be hard for you, Rob, but do your best.
I'll try. It's a privilege to be with everyone today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. the security is the first in the Maslow's hierarchy of need, I think, for a reason. The Abraham Accords and other initiatives flourished as a result of good policies that brought about good results and created a window of opportunity. At the foremost, I think, was security. And I think the challenges of the last 4 years are well known, don't require elaboration. But I would say that at least at the current moment, there is a window, and I think it's possible to see an opportunity. Part of that is the return of a president whose policies allowed us to proceed and establish the foundations of the Accords, and I think his return to office creates a similar opportunity. But if I could leave one thought with you today, it's this. The distance between the United States involved in the Middle East and not is significant, and we need to define collectively, the region needs to participate in exactly what that looks like, and the sooner that happens, the better. The distance is too great, and there's competing interests across the globe for American presence. So the question of how and in what way and in what capacity and what size the United States continues to be involved will be critical to the region, critical to peace and stability, and also important for the United States to sort through. And while that debate occurs, I would leave with you, there's a couple of opportunities specifically that I think can get us there. The first is a resurrection of the initiative started in the first Trump administration, and that was Middle East Strategic Alliance, or MESA, building a new enduring regional security architecture where our partners and allies in the region that share common interests with the United States, including Israel, would work together as a team to confront common threats, now clearly Iran and its surrogates and proxies. And what that would look like in collective security is increased joint development and co-production with Israel. We build for export, and we build to do that with our partners and allies. There's a market for it, but there isn't sufficient quantity, and that's something where the United States and Israel and our partners and allies in the region can work. The second is leveraging existing regional platforms. There are a number of joint task forces stood up to counter piracy, to counter disruptions to commercial traffic in the Red Sea. We should build on this. And there are others that exist within the GCC construct, like the Peninsula Shield Force. These also can be expanded and leveraged. And in the end, I think the United States has the vested interest, the shared common values in order to proceed, but it has to be defined and our role and participation has to be assured. If that happens, I think the window of opportunity to expand and build on the Abraham Accords can be seized upon.
Thank you, Rob. Moving on now to Ed Husain.
Victoria, thank you. Can everyone hear me? No, yes?
Yes.
I think that's better. Okay, so...
Just closer.
Sorry, I'll just speak. I'm sure they'll work it out.
There it is.
We're tight for time, so I'll just make a very few brief remarks. I think the first is to say, in addition to everything that people have said on the panel, and absolutely important on the language of economy, security, defense, trade, and so on, there is a vital language that I feel that Israel in its public communications, right the way from the Prime Minister down to its activists, often miss, and therefore open up a huge gap with your neighbors, and that gap ought to be closed. And that gap is the gap of language. And by language I mean who you are as a people and what Israel was founded upon. So the vast majority of the people of this region, across the Middle East, from North Africa down to Yemen, and I'd go further east into Indonesia, are religious people. They are people who believe in one God, they are people who talk about that one God, and they are people who uphold their sincerity with that one God. So the late Pope, His Holiness Pope Francis, when he came to Abu Dhabi, several of us were involved in working towards his visit, and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the UAE, yes, President Trump was instrumental, but he had solid partners such as MBZ and others, asked us how will we remember the Pope's visit, and we suggested that a mosque, a permanent mosque and a permanent church be built, and it was his suggestion that no, we must include a synagogue because they are our first Abrahamic brothers and sisters in faith. That push, that emphasis came from Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, because he drew inspiration from another Muhammad. And that Prophet Muhammad's history, I feel, is often neglected, often maligned, often misunderstood. And therefore, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Ikhwan, or the Muslim Brotherhood, exploit and abuse. Margaret Macmillan wrote a book on the abuses of history. They abuse that history. And I put it to you, those of you interested in forming a new Middle East, that if you want to understand the center of gravity that has now moved from Cairo and Baghdad and Damascus to, sadly, Doha, but excitedly, and I think optimistically, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi and Dubai, then we need to understand what inspires them in their private majalis, in their weddings, in their choice of partnerships in foreign policy, and in their most private waters, there is this faith element that we cannot negate. Go and sit with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and see the prayer time comes, he goes and prays. What motivates him? I'll just give you a couple of stories and I think you will understand what it is I'm getting at and what is needed here in Israel in order to speak a common language with your Arab and Muslim friends, by whom I do not mean Hamas, but the real Arabs, the Gulf Arabs. The Prophet Muhammad was sat in Medina in the 7th century, in the 630s, and a funeral passed by and he stood up for the passing cortege. His companions turned around and said to him, "O Messenger of God, why do you stand up? It's a Jewish funeral," because Medina was a predominantly Jewish city. His response was to say, "It's a human soul, is it not?" So they then stood up to honor the passing of the Jewish funeral. The Quranic verses that talk about Ya qawmi idkhulul ard al-muqaddasata allati kataballahu lakum, Moses being commanded by God to take the Hebrews out of Egypt and into the promised land. And that promised land, I'm afraid to say, is not Uganda, but this country that we're sitting in. And Muslims read that on a daily basis and are reminded of it. This morning in my reading of the Quran, I coincidentally read the verse, Inna anzalna at-Tawrata wa fihi nuran wa huda, that we reveal the Torah and in it is light and guidance. Those are the verses, those are the narratives. That's the Prophet that the Prophet Muhammad continues to inform people like Muhammad bin Zayed, people such as Muhammad bin Salman. And I think a new Israel looking towards new alliances and partnerships in the Middle East, when approaching those leaders, if you come to them with that narrative that we are the ancient Hebrews, the descendants of Moses and Jacob and Ishaq, the cousins of Ismail, and we've come home to return, you make the job of MBS and MBZ much easier. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll end there. Terrified.
Thank you very much, Ed. Shadi.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here. I am Shadi Khalloul. I am from the Israeli Christian Aramaic community in Israel. I live in Upper Galilee in Gush Khalav, very close to the Lebanese border, 4 kilometers from the Lebanese border. So during this war, we kept being there. Some of our community left, evacuated like all other Jews, and we suffered from this war at the same time like all our Jewish brothers and sisters. And why I am here? I am here to speak about my Christian community, not only in Israel, but also in the Middle East, because what we have been actually doing in the Middle East since 2,000 years ago, we were actually the same people like the Jews, developed from Judaism, and we spoke Aramaic language. This is the language of the entire Middle East. It was a lingua franca of the Middle East, and unfortunately, during all these 2,000 years, many forces actually came over, occupied us, and made us actually leave our Aramaic language and adopt other language, which is also good. The language is a communication at the end thing, and it's good, but we should address these things and the Christians as well in the Middle East as part of the Abrahamic Accord, because no one is mentioning it in a large scale, and it's a chain that is losing, and it's very essential for the Middle East. You cannot speak only about Muslim Jews in the Middle East, while the Christians are essential part of the Middle East and should be addressed also in this Abrahamic Accord. Now, allow me just to speak very quickly about something that many people didn't hear, and I will read it, and I guess many people will be surprised by it. From the cultural point of view, these two nations may boast that they have a many culture and intellectual people as all the other countries of the Near East put together. It is not fair that the law should be imposed by an ignorant majority desirous of imposing its will. It would not be fair to allow million advanced people and educated human being to be the plaything of a few interested persons who happen to be the head of affairs, who led several million backward and unprogressive people and dictate the law of as they please. There should be an order in the world, an order which establishes the proper balance. If the United Nations is really desirous of maintaining this order, it must do everything possible to consolidate it. Major reasons of social, humanitarian, and religious nature require the creation in these two countries of two homelands for minorities. A Christian home in the Lebanon, as there has always been, a Jewish home in Palestine. These two centers, connected with each other geographically and supporting and assisting each other economically, will form the necessary bridge between West and East from the viewpoint of culture and civilization. The neighborly relations between these two countries will contribute to the maintenance of peace in the Near East, which is divided by rivalries, and will lessen the persecution of minorities, which will always find refuge in these two countries. This is the opinion of the Lebanese whom I represent. It is the opinion of these people whom your committee of inquiry was unable to hear. The Lebanon demands freedom for the Jew in Palestine as it desires its own freedom and independence. I have the honor to be Ignatius Mubarak, Maronite Bishop of Beirut. This was the UN Scope Committee in 1947, recommendation of the Maronite leaders in Lebanon. The creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine and creation of Christian Lebanon, which is also a vision for the region, so it can be adopted and more countries can actually come together in peace by seeing and watching this model coming properly. Now we have the Abrahamic Accords happening. So we are talking about 77 years after. We're still talking about this vision, but in a different form. So I think what is good for the West can be good also for the Middle East. What is good in the West, I mean, United States, it's a federation. It's a federal state. Switzerland is a federal state. Germany is a federal state. Belgium is a federal state. So if it works in the West, in Europe, why it can't work in the Middle East? Why we need to impose the will of other people on other minorities which the Middle East compose? It's a mosaic of different ethnic religious minorities. For example, the Maronites are, in their background, a Syriac, Aramaic, Phoenician people. Why we should impose on them Arabization and Islamization and to be according to the will of others? Why we cannot work together and allow them a federal canton and allow the Sunnis federal canton and the Shia federal canton and still live in the same place, but each one respecting each other culture and identity and religion? This is the form that no one tried it and didn't think out of the box for Lebanon, for Syria, for Iraq, and for Iran even. And by doing so, we might achieve peace in the Middle East, because then those alliances can be formed best in a nature of that everyone has his own identity and know his best interest for his own people together with the Jewish state of Israel. This is what I think, the vision, the future vision that should be done in the Middle East, thinking out of the box and not keep doing the same thing as it was done, and we failed until today.
Thank you, Shadi. Bobby?
Thank you. Is the mic on? Okay. We're all talking about the Abraham Accords, and the Abraham Accords probably was the most significant achievement for Israel since the founding of the state. But not to be overlooked are the fact that there are many other countries that would like to be a part of the Abraham Accords, and one of the most common languages you can speak with other peoples is the language of economics. I just heard the term economic tourism in our last panel. I can tell you from my own personal visits to countries like the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, you have people that are willing to really come on board and be a part of the exchange of economic societies. And I think that's something that's in all our hands, because diplomacy is very nice. But before diplomacy, you can have economic cooperation. I'll just take one example. I'll take Bahrain as an example. Bahrain is a very small country. It's about 55% Shia, 45% Sunni, but the royal family is Sunni. They're very pro-Israel. As a matter of fact, when Prime Minister Netanyahu won his last election, it made the front page in their paper there. And since October 7th, as poorly as things turned out in these countries, because they have to be very careful about their public attitudes towards Israel, because they have to appear to be sensitive, I can tell you from personal visits, the main thing that Israel can do as a country is win this war. If you want respect from the other countries, you need to win this war. If you win this war, you're going to have peace with the other countries. Everybody wants a strong Israel, and nobody respects a weak Israel. And if you live in the Middle East, one of the ways you can strengthen your ties are economics. In the country of Bahrain, most of the residents are lifelong residents, unlike the UAE, which is a melting pot for people coming there for a lot of opportunities, especially economic opportunities. The people of Bahrain have family lives. The average salary there is around $2,500 a month. And if Israeli or Americans would be willing to go and invest there, especially manufacturing, there's a very big market, because the market is not only the Bahraini market, but anything manufactured in Bahrain has an automatic exclusive and a priority going into the Saudi Arabia market. So for example, I introduced somebody who is in the bedding manufacturing business to an ambassador from Bahrain in Washington. He made 2 trips there. He opened a plant there, and he's got only 30 employees. But all those employees know that a Jewish American who happens to wear a yarmulke, and his sons who come there running the business, they now know that they're working for a Jewish American. They're making a very good living. The guy's business is growing. They're good ties. I also brought Bahrainis to Israel, and some of them invested in technology. So I think the mutual economic benefit gives you strong ties. And don't forget that all these people that now view the Jewish people as an equal or somebody they can have good economic ties with, these are voters. If they live in a monarchy, they may not be voters, but if they live in a democracy, they're voters. And they're less likely to allow harm come to Israel. They're less likely to participate in protests or to tolerate any of that in their country, because they have an economic interest and they understand that the cooperation with the Jewish people, not only the Israelis, Americans can go there and invest. Many people have businesses that could easily invest, set up manufacturing. It's a gateway to India. We heard before how there's going to be a path crossing from India to Saudi Arabia. I would just say in conclusion, we don't need to wait for Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. Eventually they'll come along, but they pay a political price. There are other countries you can strengthen with. For example, Bahrain, I just one example. UAE really benefited from tourism. That should start again. And I'll tell you, if you wear a yarmulke, these are some of the safest places in the world you can walk in. It's not Europe. It's as good as walking around in Budapest. And you're treated with respect. And Bahrain as a country has mosques, they have churches, and they have a synagogue. There's never been any attack on the synagogue there in all the years they've been there. These are areas that don't only benefit from tourism, they benefit from people investing in economics, because the best language that you can speak with other people is the mutual language of financial benefits of an economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Harold.
It does not. Hello? Oh,
There we go.
Okay. Look, I'm a historian, and historians like context. So what I'm going to try to do is explain what are the problems that faced everyone in the Middle East, almost everyone. There is a need to eradicate fanatical, extremist Islam. I didn't say Islam. I mean, they're the fanatics. If you talk, for example, if you listen to the foreign minister of the Emirates, who's a genius, he never talks about fundamentalist Islam. The argument, because fundamentalist means, well, if he's against it, then that's what Islam is all about. So I'm not a good Muslim. You listen to him in the words that he chooses. He's amazing. Fundamentalist Islam is against everyone except, well, it's in fact even against itself, because in the neighborhood where I grew up in Philadelphia, which was overwhelmingly black, if you don't go to the church that I go to, you're doing the work of the devil. And that is what fundamentalist, mostly Sunni, but also Shiite Islam is about. Who are the people who support fundamentalist excuse me, here I'm creating the problem, this fanatical Islam. It's basically the Muslim Brotherhood and all of its units or groups that morph out of it. You hear Al-Qaeda, you hear about ISIS, you hear about this, that, it doesn't matter. They're all basically the same. They're haters. The names are irrelevant. You cannot negotiate with these people. Let me give you historically how this was dealt with. And we're not at the moment, we, the West, are really not prepared yet to do this, but eventually we probably will have to. The word assassin in English comes from the word hashish. Now, what does this have to do with fundamental Islam, or excuse me, extremist Islam? In the 1100s and 1200s, there was these mountaintop castles where people had enemies. They were leaders, they were religious leaders. And they brought young teenage males, high testosterone, and they indoctrinated them in their type of fanatical Islam. And then they would send them out, that is, the leaders would send out the people, these young guys who were studying with them, with daggers, because that's how the Muslim prophet, he killed with a sword, he killed with a dagger. And right before they went out on their missions, these young guys were shown what awaited them in paradise. They were hashish, the leaders gave them hashish, got them high, and then there were women to introduce them about what waited for them when they reached paradise. And so it gave them an unbelievably added incentive to go out and kill whatever the leaders there were all Muslim leaders at the time, whatever they did failed. You could not accommodate in any way these fanatical people, these leaders. But they were eliminated. And how were they eliminated? And it may be the only way to do things. The Mongols came in, 1250s basically, into the areas, and they went up to these places where these mountain hideouts of these crazy leaders and eradicated them. And then there was, if you wish, relative peace in the Middle East. That is the only historical event that I know which is parallel to what we are facing today. You cannot negotiate with them. They're very sophisticated, they're very savvy, and that includes, for example, anybody who is associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Let me give you some examples, and I'm a retired American government official, so I can say what I want. You'll see. Number one, the leader of Turkey, Erdogan. He says, everything I've said is garbage. He said, Islam, Islamdır. Islam is Islam. There isn't moderates, there isn't radicals. But it's only my way, and it is my way is right. It is Erdogan, who really doesn't have much money except personally at the moment now. He works with Qatar, who is unbelievably two-faced. Qatar has an American base there. No one in America wants to rock the boat. That base was originally long time before in Saudi Arabia. I don't see why it can't go back there. Qatar is, they say it's a government-funded. Al Jazeera is the Qatari government. These are awful people who hate us, while at the same time saying nice things. And trying, again, they say what they say in English. And Al Jazeera in English has nothing to do, if you listen to it, as what Al Jazeera is saying about the West, about America, about Europe, about Israel, about the Christians, about the Jews. It's disgusting and it's awful. But we just think that Al Jazeera in English is a translation of what it is in Arabic. No, it's not. And it is the Qatari government which is funding it. It is their propaganda arm.
Harold, we're going to have to...
I have one more thing to say. I want to talk about the Shiites, and it's very simple. The Iranian government is the same type of fanatic group of people. Emily will talk more about Iran, but let me just say about the Iranian people. They're sick and tired of these people who are oppressing them. And as a friend of mine just mentioned to me before, who was originally from Iran, before this panel started, it's very simple. How do we know what the Iranian people are thinking? Because you can't tell. There's no such thing as posters. You get killed. The use of language. Why? What do I mean by that? Persian is a gorgeous language. And you're seeing now more and more Iranians using in Persian nice American phrases in the language instead of very good Persian phrases that they have. They're sick and tired of it. They are our allies. We have a lot of allies. And as Shadi was mentioning here, the Christians all over, we all should work together. It's part of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And we can deal with this if we have the guts to do so.
Emily.
All right, is this on? Can you hear me all right? All right. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much for coming. It's an honor to be here at the JNS conference today. And I'm going to shift things a little bit from my co-panelists here from the Abraham Accords to what I hope one day will be the Cyrus Accords with Iran, a new Iran, let's hope. I want to start by talking about the current nuclear talks, and the major challenge I see when it comes to these nuclear talks is that we are looking at it in a very short-sighted way as opposed to looking at what's in the long-term strategic benefit of the West. So talking about looking from the perspective of the United States and other Western democratic countries, not for the purposes of this discussion, from the perspective of the Iranian people. And the reason for that is that they're one and the same. I think that when we're looking at what's in the interest of the United States, as I think was mentioned by several of the co-panelists earlier, what's good for the West actually is what's good for the Iranian people, as Harold also alluded to. So when it comes to the nuclear talks today, I think we already see a strategic mistake when it comes to how it's being branded. A huge part of these nuclear talks is the narrative. And unfortunately, what we've seen since the beginning of the talks is that the Islamic regime in Iran is the one controlling the narrative even in the Western world. And this is hugely problematic. It's why we already see a slight improvement in the currency, for example, in the valuation of their currency just as a result of the talks. Why? Because this regime is under really unprecedented pressure as a result of the maximum pressure campaign, of the Trump administration. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. We saw it with the first Trump administration, and it's great that it's being implemented. The problem here is that there is no deal which deals with all of the issues of the Islamic regime in Iran. And even if we're able to make a deal that has by some miracle of God, some verification method that ensures that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon in the next 3, 4, or even more years, it will happen after that. This regime is rooted in an ideology, Khomeinism. It's rooted in an agenda to destroy not only the state of Israel, but to destroy the entire West and all of the values associated with it, and that is not going to change. It has been there for 45 years, even prior to that, before they took over the country, and it will not go away until we actually see regime change in Iran. And so we need to look at this with a long-term perspective on what's best for the West. What's best long-term is regime change. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to go in and bomb the country and force a regime change in the style that we saw and that we heard about with Iraq or even Afghanistan. The Iranian people are not Arabs, okay? This is a different country. It's a different history. It's a different background. Even Islam came more as a result of colonization than anything else, which is why you see right now so many Iranians in the diaspora and inside of Iran pushing back against this. It's why you see the largest growing religion in Iran is underground Christianity. They're rejecting what the Islamic colonizers have done to their country, and they view the current regime as just that, as an occupation of Iran, of historic Iran that had alliances with the Jewish people from the time of Cyrus the Great until today. On October 7th, the first people who responded to everything that happened were the Iranians. The first messages that I got were people inside of Iran sending their condolences. And we saw this all over social media and in protests all over the world. We've seen the Iranian people show up when everyone else has turned their backs on the state of Israel and the Jewish people. I think it's also important to note that when it comes to regime change in Iran, this is also beneficial to the United States because it would open up a new market, the largest single market in the Middle East, 80 to 90 million people. And we are also talking about, if there is a regime change, potentially reduced dependence on China for Iran, also reduced engagement, interaction with Russia, obviously something that benefits everyone across the world. And of course, we are also going to have, if we have a regime change, we're also going to have more say in what the Middle East looked like, a new Middle East. And I say that this is super, super important to remember because the impact of the Islamic regime in Iran is affecting all of the Middle East, disproportionately Arab Muslims across the Middle East. They've destabilized Iraq, they've destabilized Syria, they destabilized Lebanon, they destabilized Yemen, all of these countries, and of course the Palestinian territories, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. We've seen incredible involvement and interference in all of these countries that has cost lives. And so we have to remember that if there is a regime change, if this is something that we are supporting, then we're going to see a very new reality in the Middle East that is in the mutual benefit of all of the people of the Middle East, including, by the way, the Arab states, as was mentioned before, who hopefully we will see joining the Abraham Accords. I think that what does that look like when it comes to supporting regime change? There's a few key things. I mentioned I don't think that bombing Iran... Yeah. 30 seconds. Yeah. Bombing Iran is probably not the best solution for implementing regime change, but we already have a population there that is ready for it. They've tried multiple times, and instead of having the support from Western leadership, they've been stabbed in the back by the Obama administration, by the Biden administration, and I really hope that this doesn't happen with the Trump administration too. But any deal that doesn't deal with the missile production, the IRGC and their activities on foreign soil, by the way, including kidnapping and assassinations, that doesn't deal with the funding and support of terror proxies across the Middle East, is not even a deal worth having. And even if it addresses the nuclear problem, you're only kicking the can down the road. We need to see support for the people on the ground in Iran, including some kind of strike fund that we can support workers who do go on strike, supporting dissidents inside of Iran, and finding creative ways, whether they're technological or otherwise, to empower the people of Iran and support them in regime change, because regime change is the only option for a free and fair and just Middle East. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists. And my understanding is that the way these fora are supposed to work is, having all now said our piece, that we can start some discussion of how we might move these various initiatives forward. And as moderator, I'll take advantage of that to throw out the first topic that occurred to me, which is something nobody talked about on this panel as part of what would be the new Middle East, which would have been inconceivable in, say, 1992, when the Madrid conference was convened to try to come to a resolution of the Israel-Palestinian issue. Nobody up here said that resolving that issue was going to be a central part of moving towards a new Middle East. So I think that is a remarkable change in what we've seen, and to have that be the case, after what we're now 15 months of grinding war over Gaza after the October 7th attacks, is, I think, a sea change, because I think it reflects what is going on in the rest of the region. What we saw with the Abraham Accords was the conventional wisdom under which we labored for the first half of President Trump's first term, which is that you had to get a Palestinian deal in order to get to additional peace deals with Arab neighbors. That turned out not to be true. And Asher's point about trade not only enduring but growing after October 7th, that's the most important vote of all, is the vote of money. So I would just throw this out there to the group, what they see going forward for any kind of potential resolution to the Palestinian issue, and if it even matters at this point. Does anybody wish? Asher?
If we look at the steps that have been taken in the region just in the past few weeks, We see steps against the Muslim Brotherhood in the UAE, in Jordan. Now, in Gaza, we're facing a Muslim Brotherhood organization. Israel is facing a terrible dilemma in the issue of a hostage deal, which essentially will leave Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood in power, or defeating Hamas and achieving the war aims, which is possible and has not been achieved yet, not because it's not possible, but because Israel and the IDF did not adopt the right tactics. If Hamas does survive, that is going to signal to the region that, in a sense, Hamas, a Muslim Brotherhood organization, was able to stand up to Israel. Now, there's been very little talk about Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. I think that all may change maybe in an hour from now, maybe next week, maybe in a year from now. At some point, probably during President Trump's term, Abu Mazen, President Mahmoud Abbas, is going to leave the stage. And I think the most likely scenario at that point is we see a diffusion of power in the West Bank. You have the Fatah and the Tanzim and the Al-Aqsa brigades and then the Hamas and the Jihad and various clans. And you'll have all different power centers in different areas. We've already seen the PA losing control of parts of the West Bank. They were unable to take Jenin until Israel came in and took it for them and took it over. And at that point, we're going to be at this moment where Israel needs to decide what it wants with the future, and I don't think Israel knows yet. The Palestinians will need to decide, are they going to move towards a path that emphasizes cooperation, that emphasizes state building, that emphasizes developing developing partnerships, or are they going to go down the path of terror? Now, the last thing I want to say about that, and I think this is very important when we look at regionally, is we've been talking about that a viable peace in Gaza, in the West Bank as well, requires a process of de-radicalization, denazification, whatever you want to call it. And people often think that is a slogan. But in fact, besides looking at the historical records, my Emirati friends who tell me that when they were kids in elementary school or high school, and they learned the worst anti-Semitic content, the worst anti-Israel demonization, and they're very thankful that their leadership removed that from the education system, from the judicial system, and replaced it with this culture of tolerance. Saudi Arabia, there's been very interesting, exciting processes over the last number of years. Bahrain has made some changes to some of its textbooks. Now, obviously, those situations are quite different than the Palestinian Authority. The leadership there is quite different. But de-radicalization is possible. And if and when we do see a move from a culture of hate and incitement and terror to a culture of peace and tolerance, I do think the Palestinians could very much benefit from this new regional architecture of the Abraham Accords.
Can I add something?
Yes, go.
On that note, and you mentioned denazification, I returned on Friday from leading for the fourth year in a row through the NGO that I now chair, Sharaka, a delegation of 32 Arab Muslims from 6 different countries on March of Living and on a Holocaust education towards something we've been doing. And including religious leaders, including imams, including sheikhs. And there is a change happening in the region that we don't talk about in the news. There is a religious reformation, and they won't use that language, but there is that process that, similar to the Christian world, underwent a deep reformation and an internal de-radicalization. So we need to latch on to that process that is taking place. Ed mentioned understanding the language that's being spoken, and something that you said, different from 92. We have to have a clear sense of our identity as Israelis, as Jews, rooted here in this region, the connection to the Torah, to the Bible. We have to stop speaking in terms of just Judeo-Christian. We have to speak in terms of Abrahamic, right? So Abrahamic faiths and that deep connection to each other. We need to stress those in the region who are trying to find those verses in the Quran and in Muslim tradition of deep and true coexistence. De-radicalization is a key here, and you have to have a full military defeat of Hamas, just as the Nazis were fully defeated. But it is possible. We've seen the Emiratis, we've seen the Saudis. There are models for this. This needs to be the next step. It won't happen overnight. Listen to what the Saudis are saying. Listen to what other regional partners are saying. They want to cooperate with us, but we need to do it in a way that works in a Middle Eastern context.
And since you were named, if you'd like to respond.
Sure. I'll be quick. Dan, thank you for saying what you just said about what's being branded as a reformation. But those of us who are involved in it see it as a renaissance, which is a tajdeed, returning back to what we are supposed to be. I heard a couple of members of the panel refer to something called Islamic colonization. So it's all well and good talking about Arabs and Muslims ending the culture of hatred, but I also think it applies here in Israel too, that we don't look at neighbors and think that they were colonizers, or the hashashiyin, or the use of hashish was somehow used to make us feel aroused about what's coming up in the next life. I'll just say three very quick things, and I don't want to be rude. The Arabs have this saying called Ya Gharib Kun Adib. If you're in a country and you're not from it, you're supposed to be polite. So I'll try to be polite. In this culture of Islamic colonization, the late Dory Gold once said something to me, and God rest his soul, that it was Sayyidina Umar, the second caliph of Islam. You want to talk about Islamic colonization? He brought the Jewish people back here to Jerusalem in the year 636. Because he recognized the Jewish people's home being here in Jerusalem when the Romans had expelled Jewish people for 5 centuries. So when we talk about colonization and Islamic colonization, we ought to be careful that we don't cross our wires. The second point that was mentioned about the Hashashiyin, Imam Ghazali, one of our greatest Muslim mystics, fought against them, and today their inheritors are the people of the Aga Khan, the Ismailis, the most moderate of Muslims you'd find out there. And the Ismailis, as you may know, are Shia Muslims, not Sunni Muslims. The last point I'll make is this, that the Iranians, they're a composition of many ethnicities. They may go to the diaspora and want to become evangelical Christians. Good luck to them. Whichever path we wish to find God in, God bless you. But it doesn't then take away from this assumption that somehow Islam and Arabs and Muslims are part of the problem. The Abrahamic Accords came about because of the conversations that drew on our commonalities, the focus on the one God and the sharing of the Abrahamic prophets. And I think Dan echoes that spirit. If we move in that spirit, I think we'll find more accords, whether they're called the Ishmael Accords or the Sarah Accords. But if we focus on casting Arabs and Muslims as a problem, I fear that where we'll head is a much more negative situation. And by the way, the Iranians had been fighting the Romans for 750 years. That's the historical context. The Arabs helped bring an end to that war and bring the Iranians closer to the Judeo-Christian Islamic world and away from their paganism. So you need to decide, I think we all need to decide, do we want a kind of Chinese communist-dominated world where Iran's a partner, or we want a world in which the Abrahamic faiths renew our civilizations and take the light of Abraham out to the wider world?
Can I respond to that?
Shadi, and then we'll continue.
I just want to quickly speak about what Dan said about peace or vision of peace with the Palestinian, as they call them. I think, first of all, we are talking about Arabs, no different than the Arabs in Jordan. Same mentality, same culture, same faith, same religion. That's one. Until 1967, this was part of Jordan. Gaza was part of Egypt. So why, as Golda Meir said, why we had war if they want to go back to those borders again? So in the first hand, why they made wars into like Israel and wage war from 6 or 4 fronts when these lands were in their hands? So what Palestine they wanted back then? So I speak Arabic. I understand Arabic. I read Arabic. This is not the Arabs of Saudi Arabia, not the Arabs of Emirates. These are different Arabs that live in this region with full of hatred against Jewish existence as a free nation in their homeland. And if we don't understand that, then we are missing the point. We can do so many delegations together. We can do whatever is possible together to increase coexistence and understanding of each other. But let me remind you, this is what we are doing with the Emirates, and Saudi Arabia is different than even Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are against those people that are here because they are so fanatic of not willing to accept the Jewish state as a free state for the Jewish people. Now, if we want peace, I think we need to educate the Arabs in this region, not in Saudi Arabia only, not in Emirates, that they are already so much sophisticated and educated about the Jewish people and about Christians and about mingling as states. I said that in Switzerland one time, and Europeans didn't accept it. Like, what? What you told? It was in the same time when Trump said about Gaza that we need to make a different adjustment. I said we don't need Gaza to have this Trump maybe offer, because maybe it's too extreme for people to accept it. But maybe we need a new mandate over West Bank and Judea and Samaria or Gaza in order to educate them. It's a 2-generation, according to academically, to educate people. You cannot just now make few tours and peaceful tours, and then you will have a new people and reformation. You need 25 years and another 25 years of education for peace, for Western values, so people can live together based on respect and the understanding and acceptance of each other. Then we might think about real peace between nations and not only leaders' agreement as it happened with Egypt or with other people. I believe in the peace with the Emirates more than the peace with Egypt, for example. For the same reason that I told you, because the values are in the Emirates are more similar now with the values of the Western people and nations, which we talked about, Judeo-Christian values. That's all I think about.
Emily and Harold, we've got about 5 minutes left.
I'll be very brief. I just wanted to respond to what you were saying about Islamic colonization. I have no comment on the Arab world. You know this much better than me, but when it comes to Iran, of course there is Islamic colonization. There has been a concerted attempt from the beginning of the idea of Khomeinism to erase other cultures, to erase Zoroastrianism, to remove Persian history with thousands of years prior to Islam even existing from the face of the earth. This has been a concerted effort of the regime, and unfortunately it's a trend that we've seen in other places of the Arab world as well, although I'm not as knowledgeable about those areas. But this attempt to erase and Arabize many indigenous peoples, from Aramaic, Christians to Kurds to Berbers to Yazidis, all kinds of groups, and we've seen some of this within Iran as well. This is a form of Islamic colonization, and I don't think it does us any favors to pretend that doesn't exist. Because of course there are Muslim, both Sunni and Shia, who are willing to accept the existence of the Jewish people and their right to exist, but it is an uphill battle, and I don't think that we should be dishonest about them. And something that Harold actually just mentioned to me now is that a lot of times in the Gulf, when they're talking about the Abraham Accords, they're not referring to it as the Abraham Accords, they're referring to it as the Friends. And that is because it's rooted in a denial that the Jewish people are from here, that they are an indigenous people to this region. This is what they've had a problem with from day one. It's not something specific to Palestinian society. It's something that exists within the Arab response to the reestablishment, I would say, of the state of Israel in 1948. It's we accept their right to exist, we accept their right to be here, their right to have a state, whatever, to be in this region. They have not accepted us. And that is where the challenge is, the rejectionism of the Jewish people. Now, it's primarily strongest with the Palestinian society, but exists elsewhere in the Middle East as well.
Harold, did you have a last comment?
On the comments that were made here now, in classical Islam, the word, for those of you who know Hebrew, the roots, Hebrew and Arabic are very similar languages. To open is a P, T, and H. It is in Arabic too, to open a door, fataht al-bab in Arabic. But it has another meaning, to open a land for a conquest, an Islamic conquest. Classically in Arabic, futuhat, the plural conquest, means to open a land for Islam. And why this is important, basically from what Emily had mentioned here, is that once a land belongs to Islam, it remains Islamic forever. Now, let's take, I would assume we have anybody from Spain here. I don't mean to be offensive, but from 712, the Muslims entered Spain. And they lost it gradually, but they lost it for real in 1492. And if you know Arabic and you are reading in the net, you will see, first of all, before the age of the internet, when they ever mentioned Madrid, for example, they would say, may it be returned to the bosom of Islam speedily. When they talked about other cities in Spain, they did.
We're
And
actually
today-
we're getting the hook, unfortunately.
And today, what you're seeing on the net is your discussions in Arabic. Again, it's a secret language, I guess, to most Westerners, on how they are going to accomplish it. They're disagreeing on whatever. Why this is important. No one really has, I think, an emotional connection here to Spain. This land where we are here was conquered in 637, 638, Western calendar, AD, CE, by the Muslims. By this definition, who does it belong to? It was open to Islam then. Just like Spain is still Muslim and Muslimized, this land, the entire land, is Muslim. There's no compromise on that. I've asked friends whose Arabic is, they're native Arabic speakers and their Arabic is beautiful. They're written, they write beautifully in Arabic. I'd ask them, do you have a concept in Arabic which even comes close to our concept in English of compromise? Which means I give a little, you give a little. And we're now, you and I hated each other. We don't. But and you're a guy for this conversation, not a woman. And you give a compromise. We can't do this here in the Middle East. Here's how it works. I asked, do you have a concept? And people said to me, they thought about it, and some people got back in about a week. Said, we have nothing like this in our history and our culture. And then one said to me, he said, I don't know how to really say this politely. It's the word that he used in Arabic is tanazzul, which means the concept of being compromised. Please understand what that means. I don't have to explain it. So they don't even have, what is the only way that works? I'm right. As Bernard Lewis used to say, the greatest historian really of the 20th century, that I know that Husain is not particularly happy with. I remember conversations years ago on this. He used to say very simply, I'm right, you're wrong, go to hell. That's unfortunately what we face. We may not like it, but reality is reality.
All right, on that compromise, we will wrap this session. I think we'll be resetting for the final forum session in this room shortly. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our wonderful panelists. The next session will start